All right, let's talk about a king so hated, so reviled, that his name basically became a curse on the English throne. Seriously, for over 800 years, not a single monarch has dared to use it again. Now get this. That quote? That's not from some rival kingdom trying to smear his name. Nope. That was written by an English monk right after John died. It really tells you everything you need to know about what his own people thought of him. And that reputation, well, it has stuck like glue, making him the poster boy for bad English kings. So you have to ask, right? Why? What did this one guy do to become so infamous? To figure that out, we really need to get into the weeds, look at the man himself, what he did as king, and the crazy legacy he left. And the story really starts with the, let's call it, toxic family he grew up in. Yeah, from day one, John's world was all about two things: ruthless ambition and just plain brutality. And that came from everyone around him, but also, as we'll see, from deep inside himself. So picture this. You're born into one of the most powerful families in Europe, but you're the youngest son. By the time you come along, your dad, King Henry II, has already carved up the family empire for your older brothers. There's literally nothing left for you. That's why he got stuck with the nickname John Lackland. And that label, that feeling of being left with nothing, it festered. It fueled this deep resentment and a desperate, dangerous ambition that would define his entire life. And that family environment, whoa, this quote just nails it. We're not talking about a warm, loving household here. This was a family where showing affection was a liability, and stabbing each other in the back was just Tuesday. I mean, his own dad, Henry II, would get so mad he'd literally chew on the straw on the floor. His brothers were always plotting against their father, against each other. This chaos wasn't the exception. For John, it was normal. So it's no surprise that his road to power was paved with betrayal. He literally conspired against his own father as the old man was dying. Then his famous older brother, Richard the Lionheart, goes off to fight in the Crusades, and what does John do? He immediately tries to grab the throne for himself. Now he failed that time, and Richard, being the big hero, actually forgave him. Kind of ironic, because forgiveness was not something John would ever be known for once he got power. So fast forward, John finally gets what he always wanted, the crown. But here's the thing. All those nasty character traits, the paranoia, the greed, the ruthlessness, they didn't just disappear. Instead, they got supercharged. Now they were backed by the power of a king. And the results, well, they were an absolute disaster for England. Just look at what he started with. The Angevin Empire was massive, one of the most powerful in Europe. And John, well, he managed to lose almost all of it on the continent. Through a mix of just bad generalship and being so awful that he drove away his own allies, he lost Normandy. And this wasn't just embarrassing, it was a total catastrophe. It wrecked the kingdom's finances, which meant he had to squeeze his English subjects for every last penny. So Lackland was bad, but he earned a new nickname that was even worse: John Softsword. And as if losing an empire wasn't bad enough, he then decides to pick a fight with Pope Innocent III, probably the most powerful pope in the entire Middle Ages. You just didn't do that. The pope's response was basically the nuclear option. He placed all of England under an interdict. For 6 years, every single church was shut. Think about that in a deeply religious age. No church bells, no marriages, no baptisms for babies, no proper Christian burials. And what was John's response to his people's suffering? He saw a chance to make a buck. He confiscated all the church's property and kept the money for himself. Unbelievable. But look, his failures as a general and a diplomat were one thing. What really cemented his villainous reputation was his cruelty. And we're not just talking about the usual medieval brutality. John's cruelty was personal, it was vindictive, it was sadistic. It shocked people even back then. For him, it seems it wasn't enough to just have power. He had to rub his enemies' faces in it to humiliate them completely. I mean, the list of his personal atrocities is just chilling. There was his own nephew, Arthur, a rival for the throne. The kid gets captured and then, poof, vanishes. Almost everyone agrees John had him murdered. Then there was the noblewoman, Maud de Brose. She and her son got on John's bad side, so he had them locked in a dungeon and just left them to starve to death. And maybe worst of all, he weaponized lust. He would systematically prey on the wives and daughters of his own barons. It wasn't just about desire. It was a tool of control, a way to shame and dominate the powerful men of his kingdom. So you can imagine by 1215, the English barons had had it. They were broke from his taxes, humiliated by his military failures, and many of them had been personally dishonored by him. It was the perfect storm. They were pushed way too far and they decided to fight back. And this is a really key point. For the barons, his personal behavior and his political actions weren't separate things. They were one and the same. They thought, if this is a king who will violate a marriage bed, what's to stop him from violating any other sacred oath or law? And it was that connection, that blend of political outrage and personal disgust, that finally lit the fuse for civil war. And that war led to one of the most famous documents in history, the Magna Carta. But let's be really clear about something. The Magna Carta was not a gift from a wise king. Not even close. It was an ultimatum. It was a list of demands that the barons forced on John at sword point, out there in a field at Runnymede. It was basically a peace treaty, a last-ditch effort to try and put some kind of chain on this out-of-control king. And here's the wild, incredible irony of it all. This document, which we now look back on as this foundational text for liberty and the rule of law, it was born because one king was just so unbelievably awful. It wasn't written to be this grand statement about human rights for everybody. Nope, it was a very practical, very angry reaction to one specific, terrible tyrant. So did John sign it and turn over a new leaf? Of course not. This is King John we're talking about. True to form, the ink was barely dry before he ran to the Pope and had the whole thing declared illegal. That, of course, plunged England right back into a vicious civil war. John would die just a year later from dysentery of all things, with his kingdom literally burning around him. But his legacy, his accidental legacy, was just getting started. You know, it's interesting. The people who lived back then saw him as pure evil, a monster. Some chroniclers literally wrote that he must have been possessed. Modern historians, they're a bit more nuanced. They'll point out that, okay, he was actually a pretty hardworking administrator. He paid a lot of attention to the details of government and justice. But, and it's a huge but, you just can't get past the mountain of evidence for his paranoia, his untrustworthiness, and his downright cruelty. Any good qualities he might have had were totally swamped by his awful personality. All right, so to pull this all together, let's just quickly run through the 5 big things to remember about King John. His story really is this incredible chain reaction, right? It starts with the resentful prince who felt he had nothing, and it ends with him accidentally creating the foundation for modern law. It's just a wild ride of failure leading to something completely unexpected. And that brings us to the ultimate question, the big paradox of King John. Can a truly terrible person, a truly awful ruler, end up having a positive legacy? Because that's what happened here. England's absolute worst king, a guy his own people called a monster, was so terrible, so completely tyrannical, that he forced them to do something revolutionary. He forced them to create the Magna Carta. His reign was so dark, it made people imagine a world with light, a world where even the king had to follow the rules.